Welcome, everyone. I hope this finds everybody well. I'm Josh Schumann from the Schechter Institute. Just a very quick note. We are currently in the midst of whatever you want to call a war. Um, for those of us in Jerusalem, we may have a warning and then a few minutes to get into our bomb shelters. If that does happen, please note that we will keep this as is. We will turn the recording off, and then once Rabbis Galinkin and Berkowitz are back, we will start up again. Thank you. Public service announcement. Rabbi Berkowitz.
Josh, thank you so much. Bruchim Abayim. Welcome to our virtual Beit Midrash space. It is so wonderful to see so many familiar faces, as well as some Panim Chadashot, some new faces as well. A number of you, I feel like it's a family reunion, and it is so great to have you in this space. I also feel like every Zoom that we do should be Pesach, because I see that immediately as we opened this particular Zoom and the floodgates rose, we had this extraordinary number of participants. So it's great to have you. I want to say Chag Kasher v'Sameach as you all prepare for Pesach. And most importantly, I want to begin by saying that our hearts and prayers are with the residents of Arad and Dimona, and all those who were injured in the latest Iranian strikes on those communities. We pray for them, and I want to thank all of you for the prayers and messages that you have been sending all of us. Our entire team at Schechter Institutes is so deeply appreciative of those messages of support.
What did he say?
So keep them coming, and I want to ask also that you please mute yourselves if you're not already muted. We're getting some background noise, and
Trying to find the person.
It's Sandra, I believe.
yes.
I don't have Sandra. Let's find Sandra.
So as we start, I want to begin with a brief Dvar Torah, and I want to hold up the most legendary of Haggadot that many of you will recognize instantly, right? The Haggadah that was given to Moshe on Har Sinai, the Maxwell House Haggadah. There it is, an original copy of the Maxwell House Haggadah. And the reason that I hold this up is you know well that when we read the traditional liturgy of the Passover Haggadah on Seder night, the protagonist with a capital P, or the hero of the story, is all but missing from our telling and retelling of the Exodus story. Who do I mean by that? Who is the hero of the story who is almost missing? There we go. I just heard it. Moses, is missing from our telling of the story, right? Pretty shocking that the hero of the story is missing from the Magid section, from the core of the story that we tell on Seder night. And why is that? The reason for that is that the rabbis, of course, wanted to accentuate the role of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the role of God in freeing the Israelites from their enslavement in Egypt, and essentially wanted to give God all of the credit. And so they masterfully diminished the role of Moshe to the point where there is only one mention of Moshe in the Haggadah liturgy, and I challenge you to find that mention of Moshe. It is a great challenge to give to Seder participants. I ask them to look out for the one mention of Moshe, see who it is that finds it. But I point that out because in a very, very moving commentary on the Haggadah, Emil Fackenheim Zal, one of the greatest Jewish philosophers of the 20th century, points out that the rabbis got it wrong. And what he means by that is that when you look at the end of the second chapter of Shmot, of the book of Exodus, it clearly says that it was the Israelites who took the first step, Vanitzak al Adonai Eloheinu, because they cried out to the Lord their God, to the Lord our God, that the cry rose up to the heavens. And God heard their cry, God remembered the covenant, and God enters history to redeem the Israelites. All of that to say that it's a partnership between the Israelites and God. It's not only God that is acting on our behalf, but we reach out to God, and that demands a response from God. The fascinating footnote of all of this is that when the Chalutzim, the pioneers, came to build the state of Israel and establish kibbutzim, they created their own Haggadot. And who do you think they left out? The socialists and communists. Who did they leave out of their version of the Haggadah? Of course, God. God is missing from many of their Haggadot because they wanted to say that redemption only comes through human hands. And so I want to say to you today, this afternoon, if you're on East Coast time, this morning, if you're on West Coast, this evening, if you're sitting in Israel, both the rabbis and the Chalutzim got it wrong. And it is truly about partnership. All of you, by being here, by joining in on our spotlight on Pesach, you are partners in everything that we do at Schechter Institutes. And in that spirit, I also want to say that one of the precious things that we do at Schechter Institutes is we work to help support 4 Jewish communities in Ukraine: Kyiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Chernivtsi. And we help to sponsor Starim, the Seders, in those particular communities. One way you could help is by making a donation for this effort to help sponsor those experiences and giving food to those who are truly in need. Josh is going to put that link into the chat, and Tisku Mitzvot, take advantage of this opportunity. It's my privilege to hand over the bima to my teacher and my predecessor, Rabbi Professor David Galinkin, President Emeritus of the Schechter Institutes.
Thank you, Rabbi Matt. Toda rabah. And another thing that Josh is going to put in the chat is a link to our 2 Haggadot, the Schechter Haggadah, which I edited, and Rabbi Matt Berkowitz's Haggadah, the Lavelle Haggadah. And we're going to be referring to them during the course of the next hour.
They are there.
Okay, thank you, Josh. I want to do 3 things in the brief time that I have. 2 of them are related to the Haggadah and what we can learn from the Haggadah about our current situation in Israel. And the third is just for fun. So I'm going to put up the source sheet here on the screen. Okay. Can you all see it? Hidden Haggadah Insights? Yes, okay. Topic number 1. How does the wise son differ from the wicked son? I simply Xeroxed here the text from the Schechter Haggadah, the Hebrew followed by the English. As you know, there's a famous midrash towards the beginning of the Haggadah. Keneged arba banim dibrat Torah, 4 types of sons. Chacham, Rasha, Tam, Sheino Odea Lishol. The wise son, the wicked son, the simple son, and the one who does not know how to ask. And I've highlighted here with arrows 2 words. The Chacham quotes a verse from Dvarim chapter 6. What are the laws and the statutes and the laws that the Lord our God gave you or commanded you? The word is etchem. And the Rasha says, Ma avodah zot lachem. What is this worship to you? And what is our reaction to the Chacham? Gee, what a wise son. He's brilliant. We love him. What is our reaction to the Rasha? He's awful. He's terrible. Lachem v'lo, for him and not for us and not for him. But really, in terms of the Hebrew, there's very little difference. Etchem means you. The wise son says that God commanded you. And the wicked son says, Ma avodah zot lachem, to you. And we see it again in Dr. Josh Culp's English translation below, the next page, in the Schechter Haggadah, right? Which the Lord has commanded you. And what is this service to you? Well, I can assure you, if you check any Haggadah commentary that has been written over hundreds of years, you will find that almost every single rabbi or scholar has something to say on this subject. And what I would like to do is show you what I believe to be the pshat, the simple meaning of this passage, and then use that pshat to derive an important lesson about our current situation in Israel. I've Xeroxed here the Septuagint, right? It's a rather fat book. I'm holding it up here. You can see how wide it is. This is the Greek and English version of the Septuagint. The Septuagint, as I wrote here on the sheet at the bottom, now you can see the bottom of every page I wrote when it's from, translated by Brenton, it should say 1851, written circa 250 BC in Alexandria, Egypt. And you may know the famous story, which is related in the letter of Aristeas. It's related in the tractate of Megillah. It's related in the tractate of Sofrim. It's related in Avot Rabbi Natan. It says that 70 Jewish scholars were brought to Alexandria and asked to translate the Torah in separate rooms, and they all did. And all 70 translations came out to be the exact same words. Be that as it may, this Greek translation of the Torah and basically of the Tanakh is from the middle of the 3rd century BCE. And a translator is obviously working from a text. Now, what was the text that was in front of the Septuagint? In that verse of the wise son in Deuteronomy, it says, maybe I'll make it larger, and it shall come to pass when thy son shall ask thee at a future time, saying, what are the testimonies and the ordinances and the judgments which the Lord our God has commanded us? In other words, the text in front of the Septuagint was not etchem, that God commanded you. The text was otanu, that God commanded us, and this is 2,250 years ago. We continue with the famous Latin translation of the Tanakh. And again, I wrote at the bottom of the page here, this was done by Jerome, or the Christians call him Saint Jerome, who lived in the land of Israel around the year 382 of the Common Era, the end of the 4th century. And there were various later versions of this Vulgate. This is called the 60 Clementine version from 1590 and 1592. In other words, this is a standard Latin translation of the Torah. And it says here, I'm not going to try and read it because my Latin pronunciation is not very good, but it says, Crae paecipit Dominus Deus noster nobis, right? Who commanded, the Lord our God commanded nobis to us, right? In other words, the text in front of the Vulgate of Jerome in the 4th century living in the land of Israel was not etchem, it was otanu. So you could say, well, these are non-Jews, these are goyim. What do they know about the text of the Torah? So now we will see the two parallel midrashim to the midrash that's found in the Haggadah. The first is found in a book called the Mechilta. The Mechilta is one of the midrashim of the Tanaim. Scholars call it a Tanaitic midrash. And the text of the 4 sons is very similar to the text of the 4 sons in the Haggadah of Passover. And when is the Mechilta from? The Mechilta is from the 2nd century of the Common Era. In other words, 200 years before the Vulgate, before Jerome that we just saw. And what does it do there? It quotes the verse and then it comments on the verse. What does the verse say? What are the laws and the statutes which God commanded us? In other words, the reading of the Mechilta in that verse in the Torah was otanu, us. And later on, 2 lines later, Chacham Mahu Omer, the wise son, what does he say? In other words, the Mechilta in the parallel passage to our Haggadah also has the reading that God commanded us. In other words, the wise son is not excluding himself from the Jewish people. He's an integral part of the Jewish people. And then we move on to the Yerushalmi, the Talmud Yerushalmi, which in English is frequently called the Palestinian Talmud, which is a word I don't usually use because that name has been now used for another purpose. The Talmud of Jerusalem, the Talmud of the land of Israel. The rabbis in the Gaonic period called it Talmuda de Bnei Ma'arava, the Talmud of the West, because it was written in Israel. And again, this is a parallel to our Midrash in the Haggadah. And what does the Yerushalmi tell us? The Yerushalmi is, let's say, from around the year 400 of the Common Era. It was almost the same time as Jerome and the Vulgate. His reading in the Midrash is, the Chacham says Asher tziva Adonai Eloheinu otanu, who commanded us. In other words, this reading is both in the Septuagint and in the Vulgate and in the two parallel midrashim to our Haggadah, in the Mechilta and in the Talmud Yerushalmi. And now we move on to the Haggadot. And here we have the classic Haggadah of Rabbi Menachem Mendel Kasher, who was one of these Talmudic geniuses who knew everything by heart. He died about 40 years ago here in Jerusalem. His magnum opus is called Torah Shlema, which is a collection of all the midrashim on every verse in the Torah, 40 volumes, all of which he knew by heart in his head. And this is his edition of the Haggadah. You see that at the top of the page, it says Etchem. The wise son uses the reading found in our standard Torahs, right? That it's God commanded you. But at the bottom of every page, he has variant readings from manuscripts. And this is a list of the manuscripts that say Otanu, to us. A long list of letters. Each letter refers to a specific manuscript that had the reading Otanu in the Haggadah itself. And perhaps most interesting is a printed Haggadah, a very famous printed Haggadah. I'm going to hold it up. At least my facsimile edition. I don't happen to own the original. The original was printed in Prague in 1526 by Gershom Cohen, not Professor Gerson Cohen, but Gershom Cohen, Prague 1526. This is a printed Haggadah. This is not a manuscript. And the Chacham says, Asher tziva Adonai Eloheinu otanu, that the Lord our God commanded us. Okay. So what can we learn from this? I took off the share screen so I can see all of your faces. Otanu, the difference between the wise son and the wicked son is that the wise son says, I am part of the Jewish people. I am part of Klal Yisrael. We are all in this together, which ties in nicely with what Rabbi Berkowitz said before. The wicked son says, Lachem, it's your Passover, it's your avodah, it's your worship. I am not part of that collective. So in the original reading of the verse and in the original reading of the Haggadah, the contrast was very clear. The Chacham, the wise son, is part of the Jewish people. The wicked son separates himself from the Jewish people. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side of the coin I'm going to stress, since October 7th, we have seen both sides of this coin. We have the overwhelming majority of the Jewish people who say, Otanu, we are part of the Jewish people. We will do everything we can to help. As you know, the Jews of North America raised some $1 billion already at the beginning of the current war to help the state of Israel. There was the famous rally in Washington, D.C. with some 300,000 people attending. And here in Israel, hundreds of thousands of people welcomed strangers into their homes who needed a place to live, have provided hospitality for people whose homes were destroyed, are providing food for soldiers. Both my wife and Rabbi Matt's wife, since the second week of the war, every week my wife bakes 3 cakes. My job is to take those cakes to a collection point, and you get to the person's apartment, and outside there's a chair or chairs, and they are filled of cakes and chalot, etc., etc. This has been going on now for 2.5 years, right? Hundreds of thousands of people every week are baking food to take to soldiers at army bases. This is the Chacham. This is Asher Tziva Adonai Eloheinu Otanu. On the other hand, unfortunately, we have the so-called Rasha, those who have excluded themselves from the Jewish people. And on the one hand, in the States, you have the Jewish Voice for Peace and other such organizations who say that they are not part of the state of Israel and they want to have nothing to do with it, and who denounce the state of Israel. And unfortunately, here in Israel, we still have Haredim who haven't yet figured out that they too are part of the Jewish collective. So our job, as this challenging situation continues, not to mention all the anti-Semitism in the diaspora, our job is to educate our children and our grandchildren to be like the Chacham who says Otanu, and not like the Rasha who says Lachem. So that was the first thing I wanted to share with you this evening, which is both related to the history of the Haggadah and to our current situation. And if we go back to the source sheet, at the end, I gave you a short article that I published about 10 years ago, which summarizes what I just said. If you download it, you will have a short English summary of everything that I just said. I now segue to my second topic, which is much briefer, which is next year in Jerusalem in the Haggadah. As you know, the Haggadah begins with next year in Jerusalem, and it ends with next year in Jerusalem. At the beginning of the Haggadah, we have the beautiful paragraph in Aramaic, Halachma Anya, this is the bread of affliction. It says, Hashat hacha l'shana ba'a ba'arad Yisrael. This year we are here, next year in the land of Israel. And at the very end of the Haggadah, we of course sing L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem, and in recent years we have added b'Yerushalayim habnuya, in Jerusalem rebuilt. Now, why are these things in the Haggadah? These things are in the Haggadah because of a famous statement made by Rabbi Yoshua in the Talmud, Rosh Hashanah, folio 11b, Yud Aleph Amud Bet. Rabbi Yoshua says there, B'Nisan niganu mimitzrayim u'b'Nisan atidin ligael. In the month of Nisan, we were redeemed from Egypt, and in the month of Nisan, we will be redeemed. And that, of course, ties in with the theme of Elijah. We welcome Elijah to the Seder because Elijah is the harbinger of the Mashiach. In many Haggadot, including the Schechter Haggadah, there's a picture of the Mashiach arriving on a donkey, on a white donkey, and Elijah walking before him blowing a shofar. In other words, Jerusalem is in the Haggadah, or returning Jerusalem is in the Haggadah, because the theme is Geulah, the theme is redemption. So I want to show you one picture, and I did not do this in color because I was beyond my technical capabilities. Let me make this smaller. It's important to see the entire picture. Okay. This is in the Schechter Haggadah, page 93. And those of you who have it at home can open it up. It is much prettier in color. This is from the famous Bird's Head Haggadah. The Bird's Head Haggadah is the earliest illustrated Haggadah which we have in our possession. It was illustrated in Ashkenaz in Germany. Thank you for holding it up, Matt. Right. And this has many, many illustrations, and it's called the Bird's Head Haggadah because the Jews in the Haggadah have the head of a bird. The non-Jews, for example, Pharaoh, do not. And there is much parshanut, there is much commentary on what that means, but that's not my topic. I'm interested in the illustration found in the Bird's Head Haggadah opposite the words, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. So you see here a picture of four men, or four birds, pointing up at the sky. And on top of their heads, I'll make it a little bit bigger. On top of their heads, there is a city. And there's a guy standing in the gate of the city. And next to the city, there is one word in Hebrew. Can you see what it says? I'll make it bigger. What is this word? It's not in, yes, it's not in square letters. It's in a cursive script. It says Yerushalayim. Okay? In other words, the city in the picture is Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is up in the sky. And below, you got the four people pointing up at the sky. Thank God they're not pointing at missiles, which is what we do in Israel. They're pointing at Jerusalem up in the sky. And the question, of course, is, well, what does this mean? And what I wrote in the caption at the bottom of the page is that, and I'm pretty sure that this is the correct explanation. What I wrote in the caption is that, I'll move this down, that this is an illustration of a midrash that appears in various places in rabbinic and medieval midrashim, which says that when the Messiah comes, there's going to be a Yerushalayim Shamala, a Jerusalem, a heavenly Jerusalem, and God is simply going to lower the heavenly Jerusalem down to earth. If you can imagine at a theater, right, where there's the guy who's in the old-fashioned stages, where he's pulling the rope and the stage curtain comes down. Well, here somebody pulls the rope, and the entire city, Jerusalem, comes down, as they say in Hebrew, komplet. Right? The complete city of Jerusalem is sitting up in the heavens. The Messiah comes, somebody pulls the rope, and Yerushalayim Shamala is lowered to earth. Presto changeo, and we have the city of Jerusalem rebuilt. In other words, the conception of the illustrator of the Bird's Head Haggadah is that the redemption will come when the Messiah comes, and then God will lower Yerushalayim Shamala to Yerushalayim Shalmata. He will lower the heavenly Jerusalem to the earthly Jerusalem, and that will be the redemption. What do human beings have to do? Absolutely nothing. Right? This will be a decision by God to redeem the Jewish people. He will lower the heavenly Jerusalem, and we will have a rebuilt Jerusalem, and everything will be wonderful. Unfortunately, that model didn't work so well for about 1900 years. It didn't happen. And along comes Theodor Herzl in 1897 and decides that the Jewish people have to do something about it. And in my opinion, Herzl was a prophet. And indeed, I published an article that has been republished in many places that is called Moses and Herzl, in which I compare Moses to Herzl in, I think, 14 different aspects. Their biographies were very, very similar. And Herzl understood that if we're going to bring the redemption, if we're going to have a Jewish state, we human beings have to do something about it. And he, of course, gathered many followers. If we want to, I always like to cover both sides of the political spectrum. So I say Herzl and Jabotinsky, Ben Gurion and Begin, Harav Kook and Martin Buber. You can take your pick of which sides of the political spectrum you want to give examples of. The common denominator between all of these Zionists is that they understood that the belief in the Yerushalayim Shamala that is going to be lowered to earth simply is not tenable. And if we want there to be a Geulah, or Atchalta de Geula, the beginning of the Geulah, of the redemption, as Rabbi Kook put it, then we have to do something about it. And the state of Israel is the Atchalta de Geula. It is the beginning of that redemption process. It has been a very bumpy process, as we all know. We're in the middle of one of those bumps right now. But I think the common denominator among all the Zionists, whether secular Zionists, socialist Zionists, revisionist Zionists, religious Zionists, and so on and so forth, is that we cannot simply wait for Yerushalayim Shamala, as the illustrator of the Bird's Head Haggadah did, but rather we have to bring Jerusalem down from heaven by being in partnership with God. And that's exactly what we've been doing for the past 77, 78 years. And God willing, we will continue to do that together with all of you. So I think that in this particular year, at this particular juncture, which has been a very bumpy 2.5 years, we need to keep that in mind, that even though there are tremendous challenges, and even though the road has been very bumpy, I think that this is a better model of Geulah, of redemption, than the model of simply waiting for Yerushalayim Shamala to come down to earth. I think that I will stop here so that Rabbi Matt will have his half hour, and we'll have to wait for my third topic, God willing, next year. Toda rabah. Matt, you're on mute, I think.
Matt, you're on mute.
Matt, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. Yasher Koach to Rabbi Professor David Galinkin for sharing his Torah with us. We cannot thank you enough for being our teacher, and thank you, David, for being my mentor, role model, dear friend at Schechter Institutes. We so appreciate the Torah that you shared, and we encourage you to bring this Torah to your Seder table. So I want to say that the shiur, the lesson that Rabbi Galinkin gave, is a perfect segue into the piece that I want to share with you now, what I am calling the art of the four children. And now that you are all experts on the liturgy of the four children from what Rabbi Galinkin taught, I want to jump into the presentation that I put together, which is going to give us some interesting pieces to bring to the Seder table. And as I open my presentation, which Josh is going to pull up on the screen now, I want to begin with a cute personal story from the creation of my Haggadah, entitled the Lovel Haggadah. In 2001, I was gifted with a commission for a new family Haggadah from Didi and Steve Lovell, a very, very loving commission, which took me on a journey of art, commentary, translation. And another added gift that I was given is that Rabbi David Galinkin was the editor of my Haggadah. So this was a project of Schechter Institutes. And as we turn to the beginning of my presentation, what I want to say is that as I was thinking about how I wanted to illuminate and illustrate the four children, I thought deeply about using biblical characters to represent each of the four children. For the wise child, I chose the prophetess Devorah. For the wicked, in my original version of the four children, I chose Jonah. For the simple, the Tam, I chose Noah. And finally, for the ones who do not know how to ask, She'inam yodim lishol, I chose Adam v'Chava, Adam and Eve. Josh, should I pull it up? I'd like you to see the artwork of that original piece. And there it is.
It's jumping, Matt. I apologize. It is jumping.
Okay, so let me pull, if you take off share, I'll share it. Okay. Okay, everyone can see the art of the four children. One moment. Apologies.
Matt, do you want me to try again?
I've got it. Hold on. Okay. And from the beginning. Here we are. Okay, everyone can see it? Okay, do you all see my artwork? Great.
Yes,
Okay,
we can see it.
perfect. Okay. So you see the prophetess Devorah at the top. Jonah is the second, the Rasha, the evil one, as it were, or the wayward one. Noah, the simple, and Adam and Eve who do not know how to ask. I spent months working on this piece, and when I unveiled the piece to the dear couple that commissioned it, Didi and Steve, their faces fell to the ground. They were visibly upset with me. What had I done wrong? Many people guessed that perhaps two of their children were named Jonah and Noah, but it was actually much worse than that. It turns out that Didi and Steve have grandchildren in Minneapolis who I knew nothing about. And guess what their names are? Jonah and Noah. And so there's the family from Minneapolis many, many moons ago. And you see Noah all the way to the left. Jonah is in the middle. The family is together lighting the Chanukiah. That is their daughter Wendy in the center and her dear husband Colin, along with their two other kids, Leah and Maya. And Steve, the grandfather, began explaining to me very politely that they could not have the grandchildren opening up the new family Haggadah with them seeing themselves this way. Jonah as the wicked one, and then Noah as the simple. And then Steve had this big smile on his face, and he started chuckling to himself. And he said, Matt, the real problem is that the labels fit just a bit. And so we had a good laugh about it. And then, of course, Matt had to go back to the drawing board and recreate my image of the four sons. And so I did. We're going to see that at the end of my presentation, what the next iteration was. But I certainly learned my lesson about getting as much information before illuminating a Haggadah as possible. In the original text that we have of the four children, which appears in Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael, it says that there are four types of children: the wise, the wicked, the stupid one, and the one who does not know how to ask. Right? Notice what's missing here is the tam, the simple, and instead of the tam, we have the stupid one. What's also fascinating too is that three of these characters are judged in terms of their intellect, and one is a commentary on the moral or lack of moral and ethical compass of the individual, and that is the wicked one, right? But the others, it's in terms of describing their intellectual level. We believe that one of the reasons that we have this structure of the four children in the Haggadah is it's coming to elaborate on a teaching that we have in the 10th chapter of Tractate Pesachim in the Mishnah, where it says that after we pour the second cup of wine, V'chan haben shoel et aviv, and here the child should ask a question of the parent, of the father, and then it goes on to say, Ve'im ein dat baven aviv melamdo, but if the child doesn't have enough knowledge or understanding, then the parent should teach. After we have the text that we know of as the four questions, but then interestingly, at the end of this teaching, it says the following: Lefi da'ato shel ben aviv melamdo, that according to the knowledge of the child, the parent should teach. That is, it's very, very important for the parent to understand that there are different levels of intellect that are sitting around the table when it comes to children and also adults. And it's important to be able to tailor the Seder so that we speak to the different intellects and different personalities around the table. Remember that we have two genres of telling Seder night: halacha, in which we talk about Jewish law related to Pesach, and narrating the story or embellishing the story of the Exodus. In terms of Torah itself, Torah speaks not less than 4 times of different children or different personalities. And it's believed that what the rabbis did is they looked at each of these passages and assigned one of the 4 children to each of these passages. Right? So for instance, we have in Deuteronomy 6 the following, where it says, when in time to come your son asks you, what mean the exhortations, laws, and rules which the Lord our God has enjoined upon you, etc. Exodus 12, verses 26 through 27. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this right? Exodus 13, 14. When in time to come your son asks you, saying, what does this mean? And finally, Exodus 13, 8. And you shall explain to your son on that day. So we have these 4 mentions of when your child should ask, when your son should ask. And it's keneged, it's equivalent to each of these, that the rabbis looked at them and separated out these 4 different types of children. The wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who does not know how to question. Right? Typically, these are the categories that we see in the Haggadah that we use today. I move on to some very, very unique and interesting artistic interpretations of the 4 children. This is from the Prague Haggadah that Rabbi Galinkin showed us before. Okay, we go from right to left: the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one that does not know how to ask. one of the very, very interesting themes that you're going to see in these artistic representations of the four children is that the Rasha, the wicked, is often illustrated as a warrior or a soldier. And why is that? Remember that we're talking about a time, as we look at these medieval manuscript Haggadot, and certainly going on into the early part of the 20th century, we're looking at a time in which the Jewish people does not have sovereignty in its own land. And so how would they conceive of the Rasha? How would they conceive of the evil child? The evil one was the one that represented physical prowess, the one that represented power. Right? So whereas you have the sage juxtaposed to the wicked is portrayed as the soldier with his arms. The Amsterdam Haggadah, again, notice that we have a running theme, right? Again, the Chacham looking very, very sage-like, the turban on his head, right? The Rasha, right? The shield, the weapon of the soldier, the Tam, the simple one, and the one who doesn't know how to ask, right? The diminutive figure, the petite figure that we have all the way on the left side. The Leibniz Haggadah, right? Again, right? This very, very European feel to this. Notice the Rasha holding the weapon, the sage holding the book. Services for the Passover, okay? This is from Chicago, 1879. Okay, try to figure out in this image who the Chacham is, who is the sage, who is the Rasha. The Rasha is probably relatively easy to figure out here, right? The smoker at the end of the table. Okay, and then who is our simple one and the one that does not know how to ask?
The simple one's raising his hand.
Sarah, thank you. The simple one perhaps is raising his hand.
Which leaves the kid who doesn't have his hand raised as the one who doesn't know how to ask.
So, and I want to point out too, Sarah, but also if we go to the other side of the table, what about the wife and the son that's looking quietly at the book below him?
He's the sage. That kid is the sage.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so you're saying that kid is the sage and not the
Yeah.
father with the turban.
Well, it says when your son comes to ask you, so that would it can't be the
Good
father.
argument. I love it. Very rabbinic of you. Okay, so you see, it's not as easy as it seems here. The Eisenstein Haggadah, look at this. Okay, remember, this is from 1920. Okay, very, very interesting. Look at how the Rasha is portrayed. Right, the Rasha is the boxer. Right, the sage in a suit looking at the book. The Shik Haggadah from 1940. Okay, look very, very closely. And again, one of the most interesting characters we have here is the Rasha. How is the Rasha portrayed? Remember that Schick illustrated this in 1940, and part of the undercurrent of his illustrated Haggadah was essentially a response to the persecution that the Jews were facing in Nazi Germany and in Europe. So, not surprising, you look at the Rasha, and what does the Rasha look like? Right,
Nazi.
right, exactly, right. Looks like a Nazi, right? The mustache, the Hitler mustache that you see there. Right,
Smoking
this
again.
Alan?
Smoking again.
Smoking again, good, right, and smoking again. Okay, Steinhardt Haggadah, these were woodcuts. Budapest, 1924. It's one of my favorites. Right? The wise on the left, right? Thinking, right? Very, very deeply, investing much energy, right? The wicked, you see this sort of conniving look in the Rasha's eyes, right? The simple, and then of course the one who does not know how to ask. Zev Rabban, Jerusalem, 1925. Saul Raskin, 1941. Right, you see how diverse and how rich all of these images are. Kozlowski, right? Again, the Rasha who is smoking. The forced Haggadah. Okay, interesting. Who is the Rasha here? Who is the evil one?
It's the smoker again.
Okay,
No,
well,
no,
interesting. You've got the
no.
smoker, but what about what's going on behind Aseret HaDibrot, behind the Ten Commandments?
The guy on the left at the top is the
Right?
Rasha.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the guy on the left, okay, at the top, who's taking an axe, it looks like, to the Ten
Oh,
Commandments. Right? Looks like this sort of evil scientist guy, right? As compared to the devoted, religious character. And maybe the Tom is the one who's smoking here, reading the comics, right? Racing results. And then the bottom left, She'eino Yodea Lishol, the one who doesn't know how to ask. Tzvi Livni's Haggadah, classical Haggadah of Eretz Yisrael and the Chalutzim, Freeman Haggadah. Let My People Go from 1972. And look here, the Rasha, right? Again, the relevance that's being brought in here, right? The Soviet soldier who's smoking.
It's Brezhnev.
There you go.
And using
Okay.
the menorah to light it.
Right
Hmm.
there. Right. Yes.
Real chutzpah.
Okay. Feast of Freedom Haggadah. This happens to be one of my favorites, this collage piece. And part of it, thank you, Sarah, for holding it up and having it in your hands. Right, how beautiful it is that what the artist of the Feast of Freedom Haggadah did is a collage to show that these aren't neatly cut and separate categories, but rather each of us has a bit of each of the four children inside of us. Right? We are all part and parcel of the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one that doesn't know how to ask. Depends on where we are in our lives, what stage we're at, what our mode of thinking is. And my mentor friend David Moss, the famous Moss Haggadah, and what David did in his illustration of the Moss Haggadah is he illuminated the four children on a deck of cards. Going from right to left, the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one who doesn't know how to ask. Each child is illuminated in relation to the book. The wise child is holding the book reverently. The wicked is sitting on the book, the one on the wooden rocking horse. The Tom holding it very simply, and the one who doesn't know how to ask, juggling on the books. The reason David wanted to put the kids on a deck of cards is because when you have children, as David loves to say, you never know what hand you're going to be dealt. And you'll also know too you'll note too the micrography, the flourishes that you see at the bottom of each of the cards. That is tiny, tiny Hebrew calligraphy. And what David did is he calligraphed a bracha for each of the children, so as to say that every child, no matter if the child is wise or wicked, I like to say wayward, simple, or doesn't know how to ask, every single child is worthy of a blessing. The animated Haggadah, plasticine figures. The Wallach Haggadah, right? The artist David Wander. Look at what he did, right? Instead of figures, characters, he used books here. Right? And the books themselves become the wise, the wicked, the simple, the one that doesn't know how to ask. Interesting to think, too, how you would identify the books. Which would be the wise, which would be the wicked, right? The book burning up, perhaps. The simple, the empty book, the closed book, the one who doesn't know how to ask. Halayla Hazeh Haggadah. Okay. Israeli caricatures. One is reading Amos Oz and smoking. Another is reading Haaretz. Another is reading Tehillim, the book of Psalms. And then, of course, the child under the table. And the final, near final piece that I want to conclude with is my illustration that appears in the printed version of the Level Haggadah. This was take 2 on the 4 children. And instead of Yonah and Noach, Jonah and Noah, I ended up choosing King Achav from the Book of Kings and his evil wife Izebel, and Lot as the Tam. I figured I could be safe in those choices. You don't hear anyone called Achav or Lot these days. And Achav was a relatively straightforward choice for Rasha, as he steals the vineyard of Navot and has him killed. Clearly an evil person. Lot, the reason I chose him is because there's this fascinating episode after Avram and Lot come back from their exile in the land of Egypt. While they're there, they wax great in riches. And when they come back to the land of Israel, we're told that the land could not sustain them both. And so Avram magnanimously says to his nephew Lot, you choose your piece of land, and I will head in the opposite direction. We are told, Vayisa Lot et einav vayar et kol kikar Yarden. He lifts up his eyes and he looks out onto the Jordan plain. What he was looking at was Sodom and Gomorrah. He ends up settling there. My point in choosing him as the Tam, the simple one, is because he judges with his eyes and he doesn't think more deeply about the kind of community that he's going to. Really and truly, I wanted each of us to wrestle with these characters. Rabbi Galinkin also points out that I was the first artist to illustrate the 4 children as biblical characters. And the final piece I want to conclude with is an Israeli ad. How it is that in Israel we bring the 4 children into just about everything this time of year. Electro Sleel, which is like the Home Depot of Israel. Chacham, Efo hu koneh. The wise child, where does he buy? Obviously, he buys at Electro Sleel. That's where he gets all of his home improvement needs. So beautiful how it is that the 4 children are woven into modern Israel, modern Israeli culture. We want to take the last few minutes that we have together to give you a chance to ask your questions. What are your 4 questions? What are the questions that you'd like to ask of our first presenter, Rabbi Professor David Galinkin, of myself, or highlight ideas that you want to share? I see Arlene Priest lovingly holding up my Haggadah. Thank you for the ad, Arlene. It's great to see you. I saw Aaron before. Great to have you here. So any questions that you have, if you're too shy to open up and raise your voice, you could put your question in the chat too. But really feel free to...
I want to answer a question that was put in the chat. Somebody wrote me privately, which is, if the original reading was Otanu, that the wise son is saying to us, then where did we get the version Etchem, to you? And my reply was, clearly there were 2 different Girsaot, there were 2 different readings. And in Hebrew manuscripts, both of the Bible and the Talmud, you have variant readings about just about everything under the sun. And in terms of the Hebrew words, if you write them one on top of the other, you'll see that there is not a huge difference between them, especially if sometimes they would use abbreviations. If they would write Aleph Taf, and then a chupchik, as we call in Hebrew, an apostrophe, Aleph Taf apostrophe could be Otanu, it could be Etchem. You could end the word in both ways. And this is the way that variant readings crop up over thousands of years, both in rabbinic texts and in biblical texts.
Matt, I have your 10-pound Haggadah, but I couldn't pick it up to show everybody. Beautifully illustrated one, but we have that and we've been enjoying it over the years.
Thank you, Arlene. Thank you. Yes, in addition to the trade edition of the Haggadah, there's a limited edition version of the Haggadah, which focuses on the 27 pieces of art, the illuminations, the paper cuts, gold leaf. 4.5 years of work solely on the artwork of that Haggadah. Thank you for mentioning it, Arlene. Other questions or insights that you have? And remember, the quality of your Seder is proportional to the amount of homework that you do. I
Right.
cannot encourage you enough to do your homework before Seder. You've got a nice chunk of time now before Seder, about 10 days before we celebrate. So I would start doing your homework now and give homework to the participants, the guests that are coming. Tell them to bring a good question to Seder night. They need to do their homework as well to feel engaged and like they're full participants.
Was there
Imagine oh,
was
somebody's
there an
written a question here.
okay.
I'm sorry. Devorah Renner, do you
Yes.
have a question?
Was there an anti-Suzuki Haggadah ever? Or was it
But
who or was the Haggadah or time-wise does that not make sense?
in terms of the Sadducees,
Yeah,
well, the Pharisees and the Sadducees were primarily before the destruction of the Second Temple,
so it's
and
true.
there's a big machloket, there's a big disagreement between scholars as to when the Haggadah arose.
Yeah.
Professor Louis Finkelstein, who liked to give all of rabbinic literature a very early date, claims that the Haggadah, the basic Haggadah text, the Magid, is from the Second Temple period, which is why Dayenu ends with Beit HaBchira, the temple being built. Most other scholars do not accept that. I certainly don't find that convincing. It seems the Haggadah arose right after the destruction of the Second Temple. The Jews needed something to replace the Paschal sacrifice, which was the central item of Passover, of Pesach, and they had to come up with something very quickly. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his colleagues developed the Passover Seder instead of the sacrificial service. And they used as their model the symposium, the Greek-Roman symposium, which was a feast,
Right.
which looked very much like our feast, reclining on couches, servants bringing you hors d'oeuvres, the main course, staying up all night talking. The Greeks and the Romans stayed up all night talking about Greek and Roman philosophy. The sages stayed up all night talking about Yetziat Mitzrayim, about the Exodus from Egypt. So it seems that the whole thing arose after the destruction, when the Sadducees were really did not exist anymore, or
What
faded
about the
from.
Karaites then? What about anti-Karaites Haggadah?
Anti-Karaite Agadah, I don't know, but I would be curious to see what the Karaites use at the Seder, and that I have not investigated. But I
Okay.
assume they use only biblical texts because they did not accept rabbinic literature.
Thank you.
To David's point, Dr. Rabbi Golinkin's point earlier about the contemporary Rasha related to Israel, I just want to encourage us, because I know we'll have around our Seder table some younger people who may not be as aligned and may fit into the description of Dr. Rabbi Golinkin as the Rasha, that we need to still bring them in, embrace them, and engage them in conversation, and not send them away or reject them.
Absolutely. And I just want to add a bibliographical note. Many of the illustrations of the four sons that Rabbi Matt showed you are in the Schechter Haggadah. So if you get the Schechter Haggadah, you have there 36 different versions of the four sons or daughters in more recent history, and you can compare them for yourselves.
I also
David,
want
can I
to
ask you?
mention, as we near the finish line, that we are in the final stage of a Schechter Seder supplement that we're going to be sending out later this week. So it's been a magnificent effort in which we pulled together our four amutot, our four branches, and we have beautiful representation. It goes through each of the stages of the 15 steps of the Haggadah. So it is something that you will enjoy. You will want to read before Seder, weave it into what you're doing, and bring this wisdom to your table as well. So be on the lookout for that. You will really enjoy it.
Toda rabah, toda rabah.
Thank you, rabbis,
Thank you.
and
Toda
everybody
rabah.
else. Be safe. Toda
Chag
rabah.
Sameach.
You
And
too.
those of you
Chag
in Israel,
sameach.
stay safe.
Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Next
Amen,
year in
amen,
Jerusalem.
amen, amen.
Amen.
All the best. Great seeing you all. Thank you for
יישר כוח.
joining.
יישר כוח.
Thank you
Bruchim to
both very
you.
much. Very,
Toda
very
rabah.